The third knock came at 7:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, which was the kind of deliberate timing that made Marcus Chen hate being awake more than he already did. He was still in bed, the October sunlight slicing through the blinds in those thin, judgmental lines. Sarah lay beside him, her back turned, one arm flung across the pillow as if she were wrestling an invisible opponent in her dreams. Marcus had been awake for 20 minutes already, scrolling through his phone with the specific anxiety of a homeowner checking email at sunrise. The knock was sharp, professional, the knock of someone who had knocked many times before. "Shit," Marcus whispered. He threw off the comforter, a disturbance that caused Sarah to murmur something unintelligible, and stumbled downstairs in his boxer shorts and a faded UCLA hoodie. Through the frosted glass of the front door, he could see the silhouette, the particular posture of rigid outrage, one hand on her hip. He didn't need to open the door to know it was Patricia Mendez. Patricia Mendez had been the HOA president of Laurel Springs for 4 years, which meant she had been making Marcus's life difficult for 4 years. She was a woman in her late 50s with the kind of aggressive wellness regimen that made her look perpetually angry, as if her yoga instructor had personally betrayed her that morning. She wore white frequently. She drove a white Range Rover. Everything about her was aggressively clean, which Marcus had long ago realized was a metaphor for how she wanted the entire subdivision to be. Controlled, orderly, sanitized of anything that deviated from her vision of perfection. "Morning, Patricia," Marcus said, opening the door just wide enough to reveal his sleep-creased face and rumpled clothing. He made no move to open it further. "Your pool deck is unacceptable," Patricia said, not bothering with preamble. She was holding a clipboard, an actual physical clipboard, the kind that belonged in a 1994 office, not in 2024. On it were photographs, printed photographs of Marcus's back patio. "Good morning to you too," Marcus said. "What's wrong with the pool deck?" "The stain, Marcus, the stain on the concrete. It's been there for 3 weeks. I sent you an email. I sent your wife a text. I left a note on your gate." Marcus did not remember receiving a note. Emails, yes, multiple. His email had become a Patricia newsletter, but a note. "Patricia, we had a small leak in the pump system. It stained the concrete. We're handling it. It's violation code 4.7, Section B, all pool decks must be maintained in pristine condition." Pristine, that's in the bylaws. Marcus had not read the bylaws in approximately 6 years. He suspected nobody had read the bylaws in approximately 6 years except Patricia, who probably had them tattooed on the inside of her eyelids. "I'll have it cleaned by next weekend," Marcus said. "You said that last time, about the landscaping." "The landscaping is overgrown, chaotic. It looks like a nature preserve. Mrs. Chen mentioned she wanted to maintain it as a butterfly garden, but that's not how Laurel Springs operates. We're a planned community, Marcus. That means planned. Every property contributes to the whole." Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs in an old Berkeley t-shirt and underwear, squinting into the Saturday morning light. "Who are you talking to?" she called. "Patricia," Marcus called back. Sarah mouthed something that looked like again, and disappeared back into the bedroom. "I have a meeting at 9, Patricia said, looking past Marcus into the house with the intensity of a customs agent searching for contraband. "I'll return next Saturday to verify compliance. If the stain remains, we'll be assessing fines. First offense is $250. "Got it," Marcus said. "I'll take care of it." Patricia turned to leave, then paused. She looked at the driveway where his 2019 Subaru and Sarah's Honda Civic were parked. 2 normal cars, 2 boring cars, the exact kind of cars that belonged in Laurel Springs. "Your gutters need cleaning," she said. Then she walked back to her Range Rover, climbed in with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times, and drove away. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, his forehead touching the cool wood. He thought about the bylaws. He thought about the $250 fine. He thought about how he and Sarah had spent $890,000 on this house because the school district was good and the commute to his office in Santa Monica was theoretically manageable. He thought about how they'd been here for 4 years, and he'd never once, not a single time, had a conversation with a neighbor that wasn't facilitated by Patricia's complaints. He thought about how unfair this was. He did not yet think about the vault. By that afternoon, Marcus had rented a pressure washer from Home Depot. He'd watched a YouTube tutorial. He was becoming increasingly aware that the pressure needed to be moderate or he would damage the concrete, which would somehow be a different violation, probably 4.7 Section C, Pool Deck Surface Integrity. The weather was cooperating, 72 degrees, clear, a light breeze coming in from the ocean 20 miles away. It was the kind of perfect October day that California was supposed to deliver consistently, but somehow never quite did. It mocked him. Sarah was inside reading. The kids were at soccer and ballet, respectively, dropped off by their mother in a carpooling rotation that had been arranged with military precision at the beginning of the school year. Marcus had exactly 3 hours before he needed to pick them up. 3 hours to obliterate a stain from existence. He fired up the pressure washer. The machine bucked to life with a sound like a small animal being murdered. He found his rhythm, sweeping motions, consistent distance, letting the machine do the work. The stain began to fade. Flecks of concrete spun away, caught in the spray, dispersed into mist. He was thinking about nothing. Or rather, he was thinking about the specific kind of nothing that came with repetitive physical tasks, the kind of meditative void that made everything feel a little less terrible. This was when the accident happened. His foot caught on something. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't fall. But the pressure washer's nozzle jerked downward at an angle, and instead of hitting the concrete, it hit what lay beneath it, or rather, what should not have been beneath it. Metal. There was a scream of pressure against metal, a sound like someone striking a bell made of aluminum, and then the concrete around the area he'd been washing simply gave way. Not crumbled, gave way. As if the slab, which he'd assumed was solid, was actually hollow underneath. Marcus shut off the pressure washer. A section of the pool deck approximately 2 feet by 3 feet had cracked open. Not cracked, really, shifted, settled. The pressure from the water had forced into a seam that shouldn't have existed. Beneath the concrete was darkness. Beneath the concrete was a gap. Beneath the concrete was something metallic and old. "Sarah," he called. "Sarah, come here." She appeared at the sliding glass door, coffee mug in hand, squinting at him across the patio. "Don't move anything yet," he said. "Just come here, tell me I'm not insane." Sarah set down her coffee and walked over, barefoot across the grass, to where Marcus stood frozen next to the broken concrete. She looked at the exposed section, at the darkness beneath, at the rust-colored metal visible in the void. "What is that?" she asked. "I have no idea." It took 20 minutes with a flashlight, a hammer, and a chisel to understand what they were looking at. The concrete around the edges of the gap was deteriorating from below, water damage, weather, time. The metal beneath was corroded but intact. It was, Marcus eventually determined, the top of a hatch. A hatch? Their house, built in 1987, had never been advertised as having a hatch beneath the pool deck. The inspection report, which he'd paid $400 for 7 years ago during the purchase process, had not mentioned a hatch. The previous owners, the Kowalskis, had never mentioned a hatch. There was no hatch mentioned in the house history or the title work or literally any documentation related to the property. But there was absolutely, definitely a hatch. "We should call someone," Sarah said. "Call who?" "The city." "To say what?" "We found a mysterious metal hatch beneath our pool deck. Please investigate." "Better than breaking into it ourselves." "I'm not breaking into it. I'm opening it. There's a difference." "Is there?" Sarah asked. There wasn't. Marcus was starting to experience the specific sensation of being outside his own body, observing himself make decisions from a distance. He was not a man who did spontaneous things. He had a 401k. He attended his children's school meetings. He'd never even gotten a parking ticket. He was also a man who'd been told that day at 7:47 a.m. that his pool deck was an embarrassment and that he needed to be compliant with bylaws he hadn't chosen to live under. Marcus went to the garage and retrieved the bolt cutters. The hatch was locked with a padlock so old that it practically crumbled under the blades of the cutter. The mechanism was seized, rusted, but functional. When he lifted it, the metal screamed, a sound like an animal registering centuries of accumulated pain. Beneath the hatch was a ladder. The ladder disappeared into darkness. "Okay," Marcus said. "Okay, so this is happening." "Marcus, I'll be careful." "That's not what I was going to say." What were you going to say? I was going to say, I'll come with you. They went inside to get flashlights, better flashlights, the kind with the long batteries and the impressive beams. They went inside and Sarah texted the carpool coordinator an excuse. Might be slightly late pickup, and they came back out to the hatch. Marcus descended first. The ladder was solid despite its age, and the air that emerged from below was cold and still. Not the smell of decay, not the smell of anything dead, just the smell of enclosed air, of somewhere that hadn't breathed in perhaps decades. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness and touched stone. He was in a basement, but not a basement of the house. This was something else, something separate built into the earth beneath the pool deck. The walls were concrete, original to whenever this structure had been built. The ceiling was low, forcing him to duck slightly even though he was only 5'11". The floor was covered in dust so thick it looked like snow. Sarah descended behind him, and together they moved deeper into the space. The room was approximately 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, he estimated. Along the far wall, shelves, metal shelves built into the concrete lined with items that the dust of years had rendered almost unrecognizable. Boxes, canisters, papers. In the center of the room was a metal desk, also covered in dust, with a chair that rolled. A chair in a basement that shouldn't exist. A chair waiting for someone to sit in it. And on the wall next to the desk, a calendar. A calendar from 1962. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered. Marcus moved closer to the desk. His flashlight beam played across its surface. A typewriter, an old manual typewriter, a telephone with a rotary dial, a lamp with a bulb that had burned out decades ago, and a logbook. He opened the logbook. The first entry was dated October 3, 1962. Day 1, installation complete. The system is functioning nominally. Federal clearance procedures begin next week. This space is secure. This space is necessary. It's a Cold War bunker, Sarah said. She was looking at one of the canisters on the shelf, her flashlight beam catching on faded Cyrillic lettering. Jesus Christ, Marcus, this is a Cold War bunker. But it wasn't just a bunker. As they explored the space, carefully because everything felt fragile with age, they began to understand that it was something more specific. The shelves held files. Thousands of files, organized by date, by name, by what appeared to be an indexing system that someone had maintained religiously for years. And photographs. Hung on one wall were photographs, black and white images of people, government officials, men in suits shaking hands, documents with official seals. And in one of them, a photograph of a man Marcus recognized, not from personal knowledge, but from history, from textbooks, from decades of historical documentation that had entered the public consciousness. It was JFK. It was definitely JFK. And standing next to him was a man Marcus didn't recognize, but who had been identified in the photograph with a label in faded handwriting. Director, 1962. "We need to call someone," Sarah said. Her voice had changed. It had the hollow quality of someone processing information that didn't fit into any category she'd been prepared for. "We need to call the government, or the FBI, or we need to think about this," Marcus said. "We need to think about what happens if we call someone." "What do you mean?" "I mean our house is built on top of a classified government facility. What does that mean for us?" "It means we're not in trouble. We didn't know it was here." "Doesn't it also mean they'll want it? The government will want it. They'll probably want to contain it. They'll probably want to contain us." Sarah stared at him. "That's paranoid." "Is it, or is that what actually happens?" He was thinking about Patricia. He was thinking about the pile of violations he'd accumulated in 4 years. He was thinking about how fragile his life was, how easily things could be seized, controlled, restructured. He was thinking about the fact that above this impossible space, his life was happening. His house, his wife, his children, his mortgage, his carefully arranged existence. And beneath it, time had stopped in 1962. "Let's close it up," Marcus said. "Just for now, we'll figure this out." "What do you mean, figure it out? Marcus, this is." But she didn't finish, because at that moment they heard the sound from above, a sound that made them both freeze. A knock on the door. They climbed out of the bunker and sealed the hatch, pulling the concrete slab back over it as best they could. It wouldn't survive inspection, but it might survive a casual observation. They went inside just as the knock came again. This time it was Patricia, and she was holding a photo on her phone. I drove by on my way to a Pilates class, she said without preamble, and I couldn't help but notice you've excavated a section of your pool deck without a permit. That's violation code 12.2, section A, no structural modifications without written HOA approval. That's a $500 fine, first offense. Marcus stared at her. He could see his pool deck behind her, the broken concrete, the exposed hatch still visible if you knew what you were looking for. We had a leak, he heard himself say. We're fixing it. By destroying the deck, you need to hire a licensed contractor, someone approved by the HOA. You need to submit plans for review. You need to. Get off my property, Marcus said. Patricia blinked. She was not used to being interrupted. She was not used to being told no. Excuse me. Get off my property, Patricia, right now. I'm the HOA president. I have every right to. You have no right. This is my house. You're trespassing. Marcus, Sarah had appeared beside him, and she was gripping his arm. Her fingers were digging in, a warning. I will be filing a formal complaint, Patricia said, but she was already backing away. I will be documenting this incident. The board will be informed. You're making a very serious mistake. She left, she got into her white Range Rover, and she drove away. Marcus closed the door. Sarah let go of his arm. She walked to the kitchen and sat down on one of the bar stools. She put her head in her hands. We can't keep this secret, she said. We're not keeping it secret. We're just taking time to understand it. Marcus, the government built that bunker. The government left it here. The government will want it back. Maybe, or maybe they don't even remember it exists. Maybe it was declassified. Maybe it's been decommissioned for 50 years and everyone who knew about it is dead. That's not how this works. How does it work then? Illuminate me. Sarah lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked older than she had that morning, pressed down by the weight of knowledge that couldn't be unknown. Someone will want it, she said quietly. Someone powerful will want it, and when they want it, they'll take it, and we'll be in the way. She was right. Marcus knew she was right, but he also knew something else. If he reported this, his life would end. Not metaphorically. Actually. The life he'd built, the careful equilibrium he'd maintained, the normalcy he'd fought to construct, all of it would vanish, consumed by something so much larger than himself. He looked at his wife. Let me think, he said. Just let me think for a while. He went down to the basement, not the bunker. The regular basement where the washer and dryer lived, where the water heater sat in the corner, where his tools hung on the wall in the specific order he kept them. He sat on a folding chair and tried to think. He was still sitting there when he needed to pick up the kids. He was still sitting there when he heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway. He was still sitting there when he heard the sound of his children's voices, small and bright, and entirely unaware that the world beneath their home had shifted. He was still sitting there when the knock came from upstairs. This time it wasn't Patricia. The man at the door was in his 70s, with the kind of posture that suggested military background, shoulders back, spine straight, a bearing that made him seem taller than he probably was. He wore a navy suit that was neither cheap nor ostentatious. His shoes were polished. He held no clipboard. Mr. Chen, he said before Marcus had fully opened the door. My name is Robert Chen. No relation to you, though it would have been an amusing coincidence. I'm with the State Department. May I come in? Marcus's first thought was that this was a dream. His second thought was that it wasn't, and that the State Department's arrival at his house, only hours after he discovered the bunker, meant that this was no longer something he could think about or delay. The machinery had already engaged. How do you? The earthquake monitor in your neighborhood detected a structural disturbance around 2 p.m. this afternoon, the man said smoothly. A small tremor officially, the kind nobody would think about twice. But our systems are very sensitive to disturbances in certain geographic locations. We have satellites, sensors, all manner of surveillance. When we saw that your property had experienced a disturbance, we sent someone to check on it. By someone, I mean a colleague in the State Building Department who has been on our payroll for 12 years. You have someone in the State Building Department. Several people actually in various departments. Building, water, roads, it's what we do, it's what we've always done. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. Mrs. Chen is inside with the children, I assume. Yes. Good. What I'm going to say next, I need you to hear carefully. I'm going to say it once, and then we're never going to speak of it again, and you're going to understand why we're never going to speak of it again. Are you ready?" Marcus stepped back involuntarily, and Robert Chen stepped inside. The man had a quality about him, a certainty, an immovability that made it clear that refusal was not actually an available option. He closed the door gently behind him and gestured for Marcus to come further into the house. Sarah was in the kitchen with the kids. Emma, who was 9, was showing her mother something from her soccer game on her soccer coach's phone camera. Daniel, who was 6, was methodically demolishing a string cheese. They didn't look up as the 3 adults entered. They were in that state of childhood where adult concerns barely registered against the magnitude of a goal scored or dairy consumed. Robert Chen looked at them without any particular expression. "They're beautiful children," he said. It sounded like a threat. "What do you want?" Sarah asked. She was standing very still. "I want to explain the situation," Robert Chen said. "I want to explain what's been beneath your house since before you were born, and I want to explain why it's essential that nobody ever knows about it. And then I want to make you an offer." "We don't want an offer," Marcus said. "You will." Robert Chen gestured to the living room. After a moment, Marcus and Sarah followed him. He sat down on the couch, not asked for permission, just sat, and waited for them to sit as well. They remained standing. "The facility beneath your pool deck was constructed in 1961 as part of a classified program," Robert Chen began. "It was staffed by 3 full-time operatives and rotated personnel from various intelligence agencies. For 8 years, it served a critical function in national security. In 1969, it was decommissioned. The decision was made to leave it in place, to allow the house that was eventually built over it to serve as a cover. Better that people thought it was just a basement than risk excavation or discovery." "What was its function?" Sarah asked. "I can't tell you that. What I can tell you is that it contains materials that, if released, would be extremely sensitive to the United States government and to several other nations as well. Materials that could destabilize diplomatic relationships. Materials that could alter historical narratives. Materials that exist in that facility and nowhere else." "You want us to seal it up," Marcus said. "Forget about it." "I want more than that. I want you to maintain it. I want you to keep it exactly as it is, undisturbed, and to never mention it to anyone. I want you to live your lives normally, and to let me send people occasionally to maintain the facility and ensure that nothing has been compromised." "And if we don't?" Robert Chen tilted his head slightly, as if considering a particularly interesting mathematical problem. "Then I have to assume that you're a security risk, and then other measures become necessary. You'd be surprised how many accidents happen in suburban homes. Gas leaks, electrical fires, carbon monoxide poisoning that goes undetected for days. Your children's school has terrible security. Your wife's yoga studio is in an area with high crime rates. Your career could be destroyed through a variety of means that, while technically illegal, would be extraordinarily difficult to trace. And most of all, Mr. Chen, people would talk. They would talk about how your family had discovered something, and how that's when things started to go wrong. And the assumptions people made would be worse than anything actually true." "You can't threaten us," Sarah said. "I'm not threatening you, I'm explaining the situation. There's a difference." He stood up. "The reason I'm here and not someone else is because I'm the reasonable choice. I want this to end well for your family. I want you to live your lives. I want the facility to remain undisturbed. These are compatible goals." "What about Patricia?" Marcus asked. "The HOA president? She won't be an issue." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'll handle the HOA situation. You'll get your approval for the pool deck repair. In fact, you'll get approval for a full pool deck renovation. New concrete, new surface, everything sealed and permanent. Patricia will approve it because she'll approve it. She won't remember being difficult. She'll apologize for the violations. She'll become, in fact, your staunchest advocate in the community. You'll be confused by the change, but you'll be relieved." "What did you do to her?" Sarah asked. "Nothing permanent, nothing harmful. I just explained to her as I'm explaining to you what's at stake and what's not. Some people are more reasonable than others." "And if we go to the media?" Marcus asked. "If we just tell someone?" "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you have children, because you have a house and a mortgage and a life that you've built carefully. Because you know in your heart that the kind of person who goes to the media with something like this doesn't have a life anymore. You know it because you've read the stories. They get discredited. They get sued. They get broken. And their families get broken with them. You're not that kind of person, Mr. Chen. You're a reasonable man who made a mistake, pressure washing your pool deck too vigorously, and who's lucky enough to be intelligent enough to understand the correct response to that mistake. He moved toward the door. He opened it himself. Someone will contact you within the week to coordinate the first maintenance visit. They'll be polite. They'll be professional. You'll cooperate, and then they'll leave, and then 6 months will pass before you hear from us again. Your life will continue exactly as it has been, with the additional benefit that the HOA will stop bothering you. I'd call that a favorable outcome for everyone. How long, Sarah asked. How long will this continue? Probably not long enough for you to worry about, Robert Chen said. The relevant classified materials will lose their classification eventually. The relevant people who care about this facility's existence will die. In another 15 or 20 years, this might become moot. But that's not your concern. Your concern is the next 5 minutes and the week after that, and then the rest of your life. Your concern is being happy. He left. He walked to a car that Marcus hadn't seen arrive, a black sedan that was now parked in front of his house, and he drove away. Marcus and Sarah stood in the doorway for a long time without talking. "We can't live like this," Sarah finally said. "We can't just pretend. We have to." Marcus. "We have to, Sarah." He was right. He was right about everything. If we tell anyone, everything ends. The kids' lives end. Our lives end. Everything we built ends. And for what? For principle? What good does principle do our children? So we just, what, live in a haunted house? It's not haunted. It's just a hole in the ground with papers in it. It's a government secret. It's evidence of something. It's something we're not going to deal with. It's something we're going to learn not to think about. But of course, not thinking about something only made you think about it more. Over the next few days, Marcus found his mind circling back to the vault obsessively. At work, during meetings, in the shower, at midnight when he couldn't sleep. He thought about the calendar from 1962. He thought about the photographs on the wall. He thought about the files, organized so carefully, waiting for someone to read them. He thought about the fact that there was a man, alive and not yet dead, who knew that he'd looked inside. A man who worked for the State Department and who had the kind of access that meant he could do exactly what he'd said he could do. The concrete was repaired within 4 days. A contractor arrived, approved by the HOA, and poured new concrete over the area. It was perfect, seamless. There was no evidence that anything had ever been discovered. Patricia sent Marcus an email, "So sorry about the earlier fuss. Hope you and Sarah can enjoy the pool deck now." There was even a smiley face emoji. The first maintenance visit happened on a Wednesday. 2 men arrived, professional, quiet, carrying equipment cases. Marcus let them into the backyard. They used keys, not the same kind of key Marcus would use, but something old and specific to the door they unsealed. They went down into the vault and they spent 4 hours organizing, cataloging, photographing. They made repairs to the hatch mechanism. They sealed it again with a lock so new that it gleamed. They didn't speak to Marcus, except to confirm the address. When they left, Marcus didn't ask them how it had gone. He didn't want to know. He wanted to maintain the illusion that this was being handled by someone else, that his involvement was purely passive, that he was just the man who lived above it. But he couldn't quite manage the illusion. 3 weeks after the discovery, Marcus was in the basement sorting through some old boxes, an activity designed to look busy, designed to give him a reason to be away from Sarah, whose eyes had developed a tired quality that suggested she was doing far worse with the secret than he was. He was moving a box of tax returns when his hand brushed against something wedged behind the water heater. It was a notebook, old, leather-bound, decades old based on the decay of the material. It was labeled in faded handwriting, "Personal log, Dr. James Morrison, 1962-1969. Marcus pulled it out. He looked at it in his hands. He knew he should put it back. He knew that opening it would only make things worse. He knew that knowledge was dangerous. He opened it anyway. The first entry was dated October 3, 1962, the same day as the entry in the logbook downstairs. "Today we received final clearance. 3 of us will staff this facility for the next 5 years minimum, perhaps longer. I'm not supposed to keep this journal. All documentation is supposed to go through official channels, but I need to record the truth about what we're doing here because the official record will never contain it. History is written by the people who control the documents. I am controlling a document. I am writing history. What we're doing here is not what the government says we're doing here. What we're doing here is impossible. Marcus sank down on the basement floor and read. He read about Dr. James Morrison, a physicist who had been assigned to a facility whose true purpose the government had hidden even from its official records. He read about equipment that didn't match any known manufacturers. He read about experiments that produced results that contradicted known scientific law. He read about a discovery that had been made in 1961, something so profound that the government had immediately classified it, hidden it, locked it away. He read about how, in 1969, the decision had been made to deny that the entire program had ever existed, to close the facility, to leave it sealed beneath a suburban house, a tomb for secrets that were more significant than anything else Morrison had ever done in his life. The final entry was dated June 15, 1969. I'm leaving this log behind because someone should know. Someone should understand that this happened. My work here will be erased. I'm already being asked to recant findings, to sign documents saying I was mistaken, that the results were false. In a few months, it will all be officially declared a misunderstanding, and I'll be transferred to a position where I'll spend the rest of my career doing worthless work while knowing what I found. The men above me will destroy the work. They'll scatter it. They'll deny it. But there's one thing I can do. I can leave this log. I can leave it in a place where perhaps someday someone will find it. Someone will know that we tried. Someone will know that we reached beyond what we were supposed to reach, and that the world was terrified of what we found. If you're reading this, you deserve to know the truth about what's beneath your feet. You deserve to know that history is not what they tell you. You deserve to know that the government will destroy you to protect certain truths. Burn this journal, seal the vault, live your life, but never forget that there are things beneath the world that are not supposed to be known. Marcus sat in the basement with the journal in his hands and understood, with perfect clarity, what had happened. Robert Chen hadn't been sent to intimidate him. Robert Chen had been sent because someone, somewhere in some archive, had finally discovered that Dr. Morrison's personal journal was missing. They had known it was in the vault. They had known it would eventually be found. They had sent Robert Chen to ensure that the person who found it would understand the consequences of reading it. Marcus had already read it. The consequences had already happened. He went upstairs and found Sarah in the kitchen. She took one look at his face and knew that something had changed. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," Marcus said. "Nothing's changed, I'm just tired." But they both knew he was lying, and they both knew why he was lying, and they both knew that there was nothing they could do about any of it. Marcus went to his study, locked the door, and burned the journal page by page in the fireplace. He watched it curl and blacken and become ash. He watched Dr. Morrison's words disappear into smoke that drifted up the chimney into the cool October night. By morning, there was no evidence that he'd ever read it. But the words remained, burned into his memory, impossible to forget. The world was terrified of what we found. The season changed twice. Winter came and went. Spring arrived with its gentle insistence. The vault beneath the pool deck ceased to exist in Marcus's conscious mind most of the time. Though he developed new habits, he avoided the basement. He took his car to be serviced at a shop that required him to drive across town. He found reasons to work late that kept him away from home. Sarah coped differently. She began taking medication. Not admitted exactly, but Marcus found the prescription bottle in the bathroom, an anxiety medication, prescribed by a therapist whose business card he found in her purse. She attended her yoga classes and her book clubs and her PTA meetings with the mechanical precision of a person going through the motions of a life rather than living one. They didn't fight about it. That would have required energy and engagement. Instead, they existed around each other like objects that had been placed in proximity, aware of each other's presence but not really touching. When they did touch at night, it felt like a negotiation between two hostile nations, and afterward they would lie in silence, wondering how they'd ended up here in this marriage, in this house, in this reality. Emma and Daniel noticed nothing. Children, Marcus was learning, were surprisingly easy to fool if you maintained the basic infrastructure of normalcy. Breakfast was made, homework was supervised, rides to activities were provided. The internal collapsing of the adults went largely unregistered. The maintenance visits continued. Every 6 months, the men would arrive and disappear into the vault for a few hours. They became almost routine, Marcus would check the calendar on the first of the month and realize it was a visit day, and he'd arrange to not be home if possible, or to be in a different part of the house if he had to be there. Sarah stopped looking out the window when the car arrived. She'd learned that there was no benefit to witnessing it. In April, Robert Chen returned. This time he didn't appear at the door. He called the house phone, a number that barely anyone had anymore, and asked to speak to Marcus directly. "I have some news," Robert Chen said. "Would you prefer to take this call at home or at my office?" "At home," Marcus said immediately. The idea of going to a government office, of entering into a space where they controlled everything, was intolerable. "I'll be there in an hour." Robert Chen arrived in his black sedan, but this time he didn't come to the front door. He honked. He actually honked like some kind of impatient teenager. Marcus went outside, and Robert Chen was standing beside the car, gesturing for him to get in. "Not here," Robert Chen said. "We'll drive." They drove without talking for about 15 minutes, leaving the neighborhood and heading toward the coast. Robert Chen's hands on the steering wheel were steady, his expression neutral. Finally, he pulled into a parking lot overlooking the ocean, high enough up that you could see for miles, isolated enough that there was nobody around. "I'm going to be honest with you," Robert Chen said, turning off the engine. "I like you, Mr. Chen. You've been an excellent steward of your situation, discreet, cooperative, minimal complications." "Thank you." "That's why I'm going to tell you something that I probably shouldn't tell you. And I'm going to tell you because I think you should understand what's coming." "What's coming?" "The facility beneath your house is being reactivated." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "What do you mean, reactivated?" "I mean that we've determined it's valuable. We've determined that the equipment there, the materials there, the information there, they're more valuable than we thought they were. Perhaps 30, 40 years ago, we were able to suppress certain lines of inquiry. But technology has advanced. The internet has changed how information spreads. What was containable before is becoming harder to contain." "So you're taking it?" "We're already past that point. We can't take it without making it known that we're taking it. If we excavate your vault, if we remove equipment, if we bring in trucks and crews, someone's going to see. Someone's going to photograph it. Someone's going to ask questions, and once people start asking questions—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. "So what are you telling me?" Marcus asked. "I'm telling you that in 6 months we're going to need to restaff the facility. We're going to need to bring in researchers and technicians. They're going to need places to stay. We've been looking at properties in your neighborhood. It's quiet, it's wealthy, people don't ask questions. We're going to be acquiring 3 houses within a 2-block radius of yours." "You're setting up a base." "We're setting up a research facility disguised as residential habitation, and your house is going to be the hub, so to speak. You're going to help facilitate this." "No," Marcus said. "No, that wasn't the deal. The deal was that we keep it quiet and you leave us alone. The deal was that you cooperate and nothing bad happens to you. You're cooperating." "This is different, this is." "This is what's happening." Robert Chen turned to look at him directly. "You can cooperate, in which case you'll be paid very well, which, incidentally, you already have been. Do you think your property taxes are as high as they should be? Do you understand how much your home should be worth based on actual market values? We've been maintaining your finances in exchange for your cooperation. You've been paying us. We've been keeping your life stable, same thing." Marcus's head was spinning. He thought about his property taxes, how they'd somehow always been lower than they should have been. He thought about the real estate agent who'd called with an offer 3 years ago for $150,000 more than he'd paid, and how he'd declined it, and how she'd never called back. He thought about all the small financial miracles of his life, all the near misses that had gone in his favor. "What if I don't cooperate?" he asked. "Then you have an accident, and then your family disperses, and then someone else buys your house and we work with them instead. This is happening with or without your consent. I'm giving you the opportunity to benefit from it." "How much?" $500,000 cash, tax-free, paid through offshore accounts, and an additional $200,000 a year for every year that the facility operates from your property. Marcus did the math. $500,000 plus $200,000 a year, that was real money. That was the difference between a normal retirement and a comfortable one. That was college funds for the kids. That was the possibility someday of getting out. "I need to talk to Sarah," he said. "No, you don't. Sarah will be furious regardless of what you tell her. She'll know that you've made a deal with us, and she'll understand that you did it because the alternative was worse. She'll learn to accept it. They always do." Robert Chen started the car. "I'll send someone to your house on Monday," he said. "They'll explain the specifics. They'll bring the payment in bearer bonds. You'll sign some documents that you won't understand, but that will make you civilly and criminally liable if you discuss this with anyone outside the program. Welcome to the long game, Mr. Chen." Sarah was in the backyard when Marcus returned home. She was sitting on the pool deck, her feet dangling, not quite touching the water. She'd been getting thinner, he'd noticed. Her yoga had intensified. Her appetite had diminished. She looked like someone who was slowly disappearing. He sat down beside her. "They're coming here," he said. "To the house, researchers, federal personnel, they're buying properties in the neighborhood. They're making this into a base." Sarah didn't move for a long time. "How long?" she asked. "Years, maybe, until the research is done, or until someone finds out, whichever comes first. And we just, live with it. They're going to pay us $500,000 up front." Sarah's head turned toward him slowly. Her eyes were blank. "They're going to pay us," she repeated. "And $200,000 a year." Jesus Christ. It could be worse. Robert Chen made it clear that the alternative was. "I don't want to know what the alternative was. I already know. I've always known. This entire time we've known that if we didn't cooperate, they would destroy us." She stood up. "I'm going to a hotel for a few days. I can't be here when they start moving in. I can't watch this happen." "Sarah, I'll tell the kids we're taking a trip. I'll make it fun. They won't understand that their mother is having a breakdown in a Marriott while their father signs documents that sell their childhood home to the federal government." She walked inside. Within an hour, she'd packed a bag and loaded the kids into the car. She didn't kiss Marcus goodbye, she just left. The research team arrived on Monday as promised. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all in their 30s or 40s, all with the bearing of people who were extremely smart and had made peace with the fact that their intelligence would never be fully appreciated or understood by the general public. They didn't introduce themselves with first names, just last names and credentials. Dr. Patterson, Dr. Hassan, Dr. Reeves, Dr. Yuki, and Colonel Hernandez. Colonel Hernandez was in charge. He was a man in his 50s with gray at his temples and the kind of calm that suggested he'd made peace with things that would destroy most people. "The facility beneath your pool deck is going to become the primary research site," Colonel Hernandez said, standing in Marcus's kitchen with a cup of coffee he'd made himself. "We'll be establishing a laboratory, expanding certain capabilities. We'll need your basement for additional storage. We'll need to run some power upgrades. It will be approximately 3 weeks of fairly intense work, and then we'll transition to a more quiet operational status." "What kind of research?" Marcus asked. "The kind that doesn't have a name in public databases. The kind that operates at the intersection of theoretical physics, historical anomaly investigation, and things that would sound insane if we explained them. You don't need to know the specifics." "I think I need to know." "You don't, trust me. The less you know, the easier it is to not talk about it. The less you know, the more credible your denial is if someone starts asking questions." The team moved in that night. They brought equipment in unmarked trucks. They ran cables through his basement and his walls. They set up what appeared to be a sophisticated computer lab in the cellar, right next to where the water heater sat, ignorant and ineffectual. They installed a keypad lock system that required biometric scanning. They swept the house for listening devices, found none or found some and removed them silently. Marcus would never know, and declared it secure. Within 2 weeks, the vault had been transformed. The old logbooks and files and photographs had been cataloged and removed. In their place were banks of servers, scientific equipment that Marcus couldn't identify, and a central workstation that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The researchers worked in shifts. They barely slept. They moved through the house like ghosts, speaking in code and acronyms, treating Marcus as an obstacle to be navigated rather than a person to be acknowledged. On the 15th day, Marcus was making coffee in the kitchen when Dr. Patterson came upstairs, looking for something. She was a woman in her 40s with the kind of intensity that suggested she'd been young once, but had surrendered that state willingly. "Do you know what we're studying?" she asked, pouring herself coffee without asking. No, Marcus said. I was told I shouldn't know. That's probably wise, but I think you should know anyway. I think it's important that you understand what your house is being used for so you don't think we're criminals. We're not criminals. We're scientists trying to understand something that fundamentally contradicts what we thought we understood about history and physics. What kind of something? Dr. Patterson looked at him for a long moment. In 1962, she said, the researchers in that vault below you were conducting experiments into what they called temporal variability. The idea that time, under certain conditions, might not be linear, that it might be manipulated, that you might be able to observe or even interact with events that had already supposedly occurred. That's impossible. That's what everyone said, and that's why the program was shut down, because the experiments were working, because they were producing evidence that shouldn't exist, and the government decided that some knowledge was too dangerous to have, so they hid it. They hid it for 60 years. And now you're doing it again. No, now we're trying to understand it. We're trying to figure out if it was real or if it was error and hallucination and pareidolia finding patterns that weren't there. We're trying to establish whether time, as we understand it, is actually immutable. And if it's not, she trailed off. If it's not, then history is not what we think it is. Science is not what we think it is. Reality is not what we think it is. That's worth hiding. That's worth any amount of secrecy. Did they do it? Marcus asked. In 1962, did they actually observe past events? We found evidence that they did. We found records suggesting they looked into moments that had already passed. We found photographs, actual photographs of moments in history they shouldn't have been able to photograph. We don't know how. We don't know if the photographs are real or fabricated. We don't know if what they observed was accurate or if they were observing something else entirely. But we know they believed it was real. We know they were terrified. Sarah came back after 5 days. She didn't look rested. She looked worse, in fact. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her skin had taken on a grayish tone. She'd been crying in hotel rooms, Marcus realized. She'd been sitting in the dark, trying to process a life that had fundamentally changed while she was gone. Don't tell me anything, she said when she got home. I don't want to know anything about what's happening down there. I don't want to know what they're researching or why. I don't want to know about the payment or the contracts. I just want to live in my house and pretend that my life hasn't been stolen. Sarah, don't, she said. She went upstairs to the bedroom and closed the door. She didn't come out that night. Marcus sat on the couch in the living room and tried to sleep, but he couldn't. He kept thinking about what Dr. Patterson had said. He kept thinking about photographs of moments that had already passed. He kept thinking about the possibility that time was not actually what everyone believed it to be. He kept thinking about the fact that if you could observe the past, then you could observe anything. You could observe crime scenes. You could observe conversations. You could observe moments that had been hidden, moments that had been kept secret. You could observe yourself, younger, making different choices. Around 3 a.m., he got out of bed and went downstairs. He used the keypad code that Colonel Hernandez had given him. The code only worked when he was alone. Dr. Patterson had explained, and descended into the vault. The researchers had left for the night. The servers were running, their lights pulsing in the darkness like a science fiction heartbeat. Cables ran along the walls and disappeared through tunnels that had been carved into the concrete, extensions of the original bunker, going somewhere deeper. On the central workstation was an interactive monitor. Marcus approached it carefully as if it might bite. The interface showed a timeline, dates spanning from 1945 to the present day. Each date was interactive, clickable. He chose October 3, 1962. The screen flickered, the servers hummed, and then with a clarity that was startling, the vault appeared on the screen as it had been on that day. He was looking at the past. He was looking at a space that had existed 60 years ago. A man was at a desk, Dr. James Morrison, presumably, writing in a logbook, his handwriting flowing across the page, date stamped, October 3, 1962. Marcus watched Dr. Morrison work. He watched him make notes. He watched him look up, toward something out of frame, with an expression of profound concern. And then Morrison looked directly at the camera. He looked directly at Marcus, or at the place where the camera was, or at some observation point that had been established decades ago, and was now being watched by a man who wouldn't be born for another decade. Morrison mouthed something. Marcus read his lips. Stop them. The screen went black. The servers went silent. And in the darkness beneath his house, Marcus understood that history was not just mutable. History was a conversation, and he had just been invited into a debate that had been ongoing for 60 years. The researchers were gone by the end of the month. They didn't move out so much as evaporate. One day there were 5 of them working in the basement, and the next day the equipment was sealed behind a new door that appeared to be solid concrete, indistinguishable from the rest of the vault wall. The equipment hummed quietly, perpetually, powered by its own systems. Colonel Hernandez took Marcus aside before they left. "You saw something," he said. "It wasn't a question." "How do you know?" "Because Dr. Patterson told me she'd be explaining the program to you, and I wanted to make sure you understood what you were looking at. But I also knew that once you understood, you'd want to test it. And I knew that the system would allow you to test it because that's its purpose. To show you things, to make you complicit, to bind you to it." "Who was looking at me?" Marcus asked. In the footage, James Morrison, he looked right at the camera. He looked at a temporal observation point. The researchers in 1962 knew they were being observed. They knew that someone in the future would eventually activate the system and see what they were seeing. They left messages. Dr. Morrison left messages. They're addressed to whoever finds the vault. They're warnings. Warnings about what? About the fact that the universe is not what we think it is. That time is not a river flowing in one direction. That observation and consciousness can create paradoxes. That some people have known about this for longer than others, and that this knowledge has been kept secret because the implications would destabilize everything. He handed Marcus a key card. "This will let you into the vault anytime you want. I'm giving it to you because you're going to go down there. You're going to watch more of the footage. You're going to become obsessed with it. And once you're obsessed with it, you'll understand why it needs to be kept secret." Then Colonel Hernandez left. His team left. The house became theirs again, except it wasn't. It would never be theirs again. They lived in a house that belonged to something else now, something that used them as caretakers and observers. Sarah knew. She didn't know the specifics, but she knew that something fundamental had changed. She watched Marcus with the careful attention of someone tracking a loved one's mental decline. She noticed when he started going to the basement. She noticed when he stopped eating regular meals. She noticed when he started pulling books on theoretical physics from the library and trying to read them at 2 a.m. "You need to stop," she said one night, catching him coming out of the basement at 4 in the morning. "Stop what?" "Whatever this is, whatever you're doing down there, it's destroying you." "I'm just trying to understand." "I don't care. I don't want you to understand. I want you to close that door, change the code, and never go back. Can you do that? Can you do that for me?" He said yes, he meant it, but within 3 days he was back down there again. The vault had changed. The systems had evolved. The interface was now more sophisticated, allowing him to navigate the database of observations. He could access files that had been classified for decades. He could see photographs and video recordings, actual video recordings made through temporal observation points, which should have been impossible but somehow were. He watched President Kennedy's assassination, not from the famous angles, from perspectives that nobody had ever seen, from perspectives inside the motorcade, from moments before it happened, from moments after. He watched events unfolding from angles that changed the narrative entirely, or seemed to, or maybe didn't, and his mind was just trying to impose narrative on chaos. He watched the moon landing. He watched historical figures in private moments. He watched conversations that had been kept secret by governments and individuals and families. He watched his own past. There was a file labeled Subject Chen Observation History. He clicked on it with trembling fingers. The first observation was dated March 15, 1985. It showed a young man, himself, or a version of himself, standing in his childhood bedroom looking at a college acceptance letter. His face was radiant. He was going to Harvard. His whole life was ahead of him. Everything was possible. Marcus watched this version of himself read the letter, watched him fall back on his bed, watched him cry with joy. The second observation was dated June 12, 2003. His graduation from Harvard Law School. He was the top of his class. He was going to change the world. His parents were crying in the audience. The third observation was dated May 28, 2005. His wedding day. Sarah looked impossibly beautiful. They were both terrified and euphoric. The future was theirs. The fourth observation was dated October 15, 2025, 3 weeks ago. Marcus and Sarah lying in bed, not touching, both staring at the ceiling in the darkness. Neither of them sleeping, both of them thinking about the vault beneath their house. And then there was one more. It wasn't dated, the timestamp just read pending observation. The file name was the choice. Marcus clicked on it, the screen filled with static. A message appeared. This observation has not yet occurred. Observation will be possible only after the choice has been made. The system awaits your decision. What decision? Marcus said aloud. The monitor flickered. An audio file began to play. It was Dr. James Morrison's voice, recorded from the vault in 1962, preserved in digital form by systems that shouldn't have been able to digitize audio from the 1960s. If you're hearing this, you've accessed the vault, you've seen the evidence. You understand that time is not immutable. You understand that history is subject to observation and possibly to revision. And now you face the choice that we all face, everyone who understands this. Do you leave the system in place and let others use it, or do you try to destroy it? The voice paused. In the background, Marcus could hear other sounds, footsteps, papers rustling, the ambient noise of an office from 60 years ago. If you leave it in place, the system grows, more researchers become involved, more governments become aware of its capabilities. Eventually, someone uses it not just to observe history, but to change it. And when that happens, everything becomes unstable. The timeline itself becomes uncertain. The past becomes as mutable as the future, and we all live in a world that could shift at any moment. If you try to destroy it, the federal government will stop you. They've invested too much. They need the system. They need it for leverage, for understanding, for power. They will kill you and everyone you love to keep it functional. They will rewrite history to make you disappear. There is no winning choice, Mr. Chen. There is only the choice you can live with, and you will make it because you are human and humans always make choices, even when every choice is wrong. The audio ended. The screen went blank. Marcus didn't go upstairs that night. He fell asleep on the basement floor next to the servers, his back against the cold concrete. He dreamed of timelines branching and rebranching, possibilities splitting into impossibilities. He dreamed of himself choosing differently at crucial moments, leading to versions of himself that were happier, sadder, richer, poorer, dead, alive, transformed. He dreamed that there were infinite versions of him watching this same moment from infinite timelines, all equally real, all equally trapped. He woke to find Sarah sitting beside him in the darkness. "Come upstairs," she said. He followed her. She made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table as dawn broke outside, and she talked. "I saw a therapist," she said. "While I was at the hotel, I told her I couldn't tell her what was wrong, but I told her I was trapped in a situation and I couldn't leave it and I couldn't fight it. And she asked me what would happen if I just left, if I just took the kids and left. They'd come after us," Marcus said. "That's what I said. And she asked me if I really believed that or if I was just afraid of what would happen, if maybe they'd just let us go and we'd let them stay in our house and we'd just be somewhere else." Robert Chen said, "I don't care what Robert Chen said. He was trying to control you. They're all trying to control us. And the way they control us is by making us believe that we have no choices. But what if that's not true? What if we just leave?" Marcus wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that it could be that simple. He wanted to believe that he could pack a car, take his family, drive to another state, and just start over. He wanted to believe in the possibility of freedom. "They'll find us," he said. "Maybe, or maybe they won't care. Maybe we're not as important as we think we are. Maybe the vault is just a government project and we're just the people who happen to find it, and they'll let us walk away because it's easier than the alternative. And if they don't, then at least we tried. At least we weren't sitting in our house, slowly disappearing into the basement, watching footage of our own lives for a system that doesn't care about us." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "Leave with me," she said. "Today, pack a bag and leave." For a moment, Marcus almost did it. For a moment, the possibility of escape seemed real. For a moment, he imagined the car loaded, the highway stretching ahead, a future that wasn't written in the filing systems of federal agencies. Then the power went out. The entire house went dark simultaneously. The coffee maker went silent. The refrigerator stopped humming. The light that had been filtering through the windows died. And beneath the house, the vault went quiet. The servers that had been humming continuously for weeks fell silent. Marcus and Sarah stood in the darkness. From upstairs, they could hear Emma calling for them. "The circuit breaker," Marcus said. "Check the circuit breaker." He went to the garage. The circuit breaker was still in the ON position. The house wasn't on the grid anymore, it had been disconnected. He knew somehow that he would find the same had happened to the neighbors' houses. He knew that this was deliberate. When he came back inside, there was a note on the kitchen table. It was written in handwriting that wasn't his, wasn't Sarah's. The note read, "If you leave, we will find you. If you try to destroy the vault, we will destroy you. If you try to tell anyone, nobody will believe you. The only option is compliance. This is the final warning. The next violation will be the last." They stood in the darkness and understood that Colonel Hernandez and Robert Chen and everyone else had known, all along, what Sarah's choice was going to be. They had anticipated it. They had prepared for it. The power returned after exactly 1 hour. Sarah didn't try to leave again. Over the next several months, Marcus developed a routine. He would wake at 6 a.m., he would make breakfast for the kids, he would drive them to school. He would come home. He would go to work for a consulting firm that paid him adequately for work he did not do. He would come home, he would make dinner, he would help with homework, he would put the children to bed. And then, when Sarah was asleep, he would go to the vault. The system had learned him. The interface adapted to his interests. It began feeding him observations tailored to his curiosities. It showed him his parents' lives before he was born. It showed him his childhood from perspectives that shouldn't have existed. It showed him all the moments where his life could have gone differently, preserved in the eternal present of temporal observation. He learned that the system was older than the government believed it was. It wasn't built in 1962. It was discovered in 1962. It had existed beneath the earth for far longer than anyone knew. The researchers in the vault had found it already complete, already functional, waiting for someone to activate it. He learned that there were other vaults, other systems, other facilities across the country and across the world, all connected to the same network, all observing time from different angles, building a comprehensive picture of history that contradicted every historical record that existed. He learned that the government had been manipulating people for decades by showing them carefully selected observations that reinforced the narratives they wanted believed. He learned that history was not just being written. It was being rewritten in real time by people who had access to tools that nobody else even knew existed. He learned that the system wanted to be used. It was designed to be used. It wanted to expand. It wanted to be discovered by more people. It wanted to proliferate. And he understood that his role was to be a vector for that proliferation. His job was to figure out how to use the system to change things, to alter observations, to create paradoxes, to destabilize history. His job was to be the reason that everything fell apart. Dr. Patterson came back in the spring. She arrived without warning, without escort, just showed up at the front door one Saturday morning looking haggard. "I'm leaving the program," she said without preamble when Marcus opened the door. "I'm going to blow this up, and I need your help." "I can't help you," Marcus said. "You don't understand. The system isn't just observing history. We've discovered that the observations themselves are creating paradoxes. Each time we look at an event, we're creating a branch point. Reality is forking. There are multiple timelines now, and they're starting to collapse into each other. We don't have much time before the whole thing catastrophically fails." "Then let it fail." "You can't let it fail. If it fails catastrophically, the paradoxes it creates could destroy everything. Billions of people, gone, never existed. In some timelines, you're already dead. In others, your family never was born. We have to control the failure. We have to shut it down properly before it cascades." "I don't know how to help you." "You do. You have access to the vault. You have the clearance codes. You can help me plant evidence. Evidence that will convince the government that the system is dangerous. Evidence that will make them want to shut it down before it's too late." Marcus closed the door. He didn't open it again, even when Dr. Patterson started knocking. Within the hour, federal agents arrived and took her away. They didn't do anything violent. They just showed up and she got into their car and drove away, as if she'd never existed. But Marcus had understood in that moment what she was trying to tell him. The system was failing. Reality was degrading. The timeline was becoming unstable. And he was the only person in position to do anything about it. There was no return address, but it was addressed to Marcus personally, and it contained 2 documents. The first was a list of dates and locations. Each date corresponded to a specific temporal observation, moments in history that had been accessed and observed through the system. The second document was a single sentence, written in longhand. When you observe the same moment multiple times, you create a paradox that weakens the timeline. The system knows this. The system wants this. Help me. The handwriting was Marcus's own. He sat with the letter for 2 hours, trying to make sense of it. Either he had written it and forgotten, which was impossible, or he had written it in a timeline that was now collapsing into this one, which meant that parallel versions of events were bleeding through, or someone had forged his handwriting, which seemed unlikely. Or, and this was the thought that terrified him most, this was the message he was supposed to send to himself. This was the future, reaching back, trying to warn him of what he was going to do. He went to the basement and accessed the file labeled The Choice. The pending observation was still there, still undated, still waiting. He clicked on it. This time, instead of static, he saw a room. His room, the basement. But it was on fire. The servers were burning. The files were ash. And standing in the center of the flames was Marcus himself, hand on a switch, face illuminated by fire. The timestamp at the bottom of the screen read, 30 days. That night at 3 a.m., Marcus woke Sarah. "We need to talk about leaving," he said. Sarah's eyes snapped open immediately. She had been waiting for this conversation, waiting for him to finally say what she'd been thinking for months. "What changed?" she asked. "I got a message from the future." She sat up. She didn't laugh. She didn't ask him to clarify. She just listened as he told her about the envelope, the handwriting, the observation. "How do we leave?" she asked when he finished. "I don't think we do," Marcus said. "I think the future is already determined. I think I'm going to shut down the system. I think that's what I've been chosen to do." "By who?" "By myself, by the government, by the system itself, by someone. The lines are so blurred now that I can't tell the difference anymore." Sarah got out of bed. She walked to the window and looked out at the night. Their neighborhood was quiet, normal, completely unaware of the temporal distortions happening beneath it. "Then we shut it down together," she said, "and we face whatever comes next together." The plan, if it could be called that, was simple. Marcus would need access to the vault's central system core, the nexus point where all the temporal observations were being processed and stored. He would need to plant a device there that would fry the electronics, cascade the system offline, and prevent any attempts to remotely restore it. The problem was that the vault was monitored, not constantly, but regularly. Maintenance personnel came every 2 weeks. Security protocols had been installed that made it nearly impossible to approach the central core without triggering alarms. The solution came from an unlikely place. Patricia Mendez called Marcus one evening. Her voice was strange, too formal, too careful, as if she were reading from a script that had been written for her. "I'd like to speak with you about the HOA situation," she said. "Could we meet tomorrow at the community center?" Marcus met her in an empty parking lot behind the community center. Patricia got out of her white Range Rover and walked toward him, and in the daylight, Marcus could see that something was wrong with her eyes. They had a glazed quality. She was either medicated or had been otherwise compromised. "I've been asked to help you," Patricia said when she reached him. "That's how this works. The government keeps people like me in place, people who are malleable, people who can be adjusted. When you need something, they adjust us. When you need help, we help." "I don't need anything from you." "Yes, you do. You need the facility security codes. You need to know when the maintenance personnel will be in the facility. You need to know how to bypass the alarms. I've been given this information, and I'm supposed to pass it to you." "Why would they help me shut down the system?" "Because they don't actually want it operational. Because the system is becoming unstable and they know it. Because if someone inside the system doesn't shut it down, it will destroy itself, and when it does, it will take a lot more than a house with it. The government wants you to shut it down, Mr. Chen. They're just not allowed to do it directly." Patricia pulled a USB drive from her pocket and handed it to him. "Everything you need is on there. You have 48 hours before the next maintenance cycle. After that, they'll know something is wrong and they'll lock down the facility." She turned to leave. "Patricia, wait, what happens to you?" "I don't know," she said. I never know what happens to me. I just do what I'm told and then I forget it happened. Tomorrow I won't remember this conversation. Tomorrow I'll go back to harassing people about pool deck violations. I'll go back to being the HOA president and that will be my life, and I'll never know what I did or why I did it. She drove away. The USB drive contained everything Patricia had promised. Security codes, maintenance schedules, building schematics showing the location of the secondary power line that could be used to fry the system if properly interrupted. Marcus studied it all, committed it to memory, and then he did what the instructions on the drive specified. He destroyed it. He had 48 hours. Sarah didn't try to talk him out of it. She helped him prepare. She made sure Emma and Daniel would be safe. She arranged for them to sleep at a cousin's house, told their school there would be a family emergency. She packed documents and photographs and anything irreplaceable. At 11 p.m. on the second night, Marcus went to the basement. The house was quiet. The servers hummed their eternal hum. The archives of temporal observation sat in their digital storage, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be used, waiting to proliferate to other systems and other minds. He used the code that Patricia had provided. The security system deactivated without fuss. He had the feeling, as he worked, that he was being allowed to do this, that every step was exactly what the system wanted him to take. He placed the device that he'd constructed according to the schematics on the USB drive, a simple electromagnetic pulse generator, powerful enough to fry the circuit boards but not powerful enough to cause a structural explosion. He set the timer for 1 hour. And then he walked back upstairs and sat with Sarah in the kitchen and waited for the past to stop observing the future. There was a sound like thunder, but contained, localized beneath the house. The lights flickered and died. In the basement, Marcus knew every server was frying, every storage drive was corrupting, every observation was collapsing into data that couldn't be recovered. The temporal vault was closing. The past was becoming truly past again. For 5 minutes, there was only darkness and silence. Then the lights came back on. Federal agents, which in retrospect seemed inevitable, emerged from the vehicles that pulled into the driveway. They came through the front door without knocking, weapons visible but not drawn, faces professional and resigned. Colonel Hernandez was not among them. Instead, there was a woman in her 60s, severe and gray, who identified herself only as Deputy Director Walsh. "The system is destroyed," Deputy Director Walsh said, standing in his living room at 1 a.m. "The temporal observation archive is completely compromised, years of data lost, generations of research gone. Do you understand what you've done?" "I understand," Marcus said. "No, you don't, because if you did, you'd know that this is the third time you've done this. In Timeline A, you shut it down in 2026, and it set off a cascading paradox that destroyed the eastern seaboard. In Timeline B, you shut it down in 2024, and it caused a temporal fissure that erased 2 million people from existence. We've been trying to prevent you from shutting it down." "Then why didn't you stop me?" "Because you will have shut it down, Mr. Chen. In every possible future where this conversation happens, you will have destroyed the system. We've tried keeping you away from the basement. We've tried mind control, medication, simple threats. Nothing works. The future is determined. You're going to do this. We just want to know if there's anything we can do to mitigate the damage." Marcus looked at Deputy Director Walsh. He thought about Dr. Morrison's message from 1962. He thought about all the people watching from all the timelines. He thought about the fact that some choices were already made by the time you understood they were choices at all. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we take you into custody. We study the system's failure to understand why it doesn't work the way we predicted. We try again in the next timeline. You and your family will be relocated to a facility where we can keep an eye on you. You'll live quiet lives, and we'll try to figure out how to prevent you from destroying the world." "And if I refuse?" "You won't. In every timeline, you've never refused. You've always cooperated because you know on some level that your cooperation might be the thing that saves everyone." Deputy Director Walsh was right. Marcus stood up. He let them take him to a black car. He let them drive him away from the house where he'd lived for 4 years. He let them take Sarah and Emma and Daniel from their cousin's house and relocate them to a facility in Nevada that looked like a suburban home but had walls that were 3 feet thick. But before he left, in that car, driving away from his old life, he thought about something Deputy Director Walsh had said. In every possible future where this conversation happens. That meant there were futures where the conversation didn't happen. Futures where the system had never been discovered. Futures where he'd never found the vault. Futures where he'd simply pressure washed the pool deck and not hit the seam in the concrete. He wondered if in those futures, those better futures, the system was still operating. If there were versions of him watching the timeline from beneath suburban houses across the country, slowly being consumed by knowledge they were never supposed to have. He wondered if this was how the world actually worked, not on politics or economics or chance, but on the careful manipulation of people by systems so old and so vast that nobody could see their edges. He wondered if the future he'd just destroyed was any worse than the future he'd just helped create. But mostly, looking back at his house as the car turned the corner and it disappeared from view, he wondered if he'd made the right choice. He suspected he'd never know. He suspected that was the point. The facility in Nevada looked like a suburb, and after 20 years, Marcus had almost managed to trick himself into believing it was just a suburb. Emma had graduated from high school. Her school was in the facility, all classes handled by federal contractors. Daniel was in his senior year, talking about college. Sarah had become a therapist for other people in the facility, which was both ironic and appropriate. Marcus worked in maintenance. He fixed things, he didn't ask too many questions, he didn't try to leave. On his 49th birthday, he received a visitor. The visitor was a woman he'd never seen before, though her face seemed familiar in the way faces sometimes do. She was in her 30s, maybe, or maybe she was younger and looked older. It was hard to tell. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm a temporal physicist. I've been studying the collapse of the temporal observation system that you destroyed in 2025. Marcus didn't shake her hand. "Why are you here?" "Because I'm you," she said. "Or more accurately, I'm the child of your decision. I was born in 2027 in a timeline that wouldn't have existed if you hadn't destroyed the system. I'm part of the cascade effect that Deputy Director Walsh was trying to prevent. And now I'm here to tell you what happened in the timelines where you didn't destroy the system." "I don't want to know." "You do, because then you can understand whether you made the right choice." Sarah, this temporal version of Sarah, this echo of Emma or Daniel or someone else's child, pulled out a document. It was dense with equations and diagrams, incomprehensible to Marcus. "In every timeline where the system continued to operate," she said, "the observations accumulated, the paradoxes compounded. By 2050 in those timelines, the cascade had reached critical mass. Reality began to fail. The past started bleeding through into the present. Dead people appeared in photographs. Events began happening twice, then 3 times, then infinitely. People couldn't distinguish between original events and observed events. The entire concept of causality broke down. And in the timelines where I destroyed it. Localized damage. The facility was destroyed. 47 people died in the initial cascade. 3 million people were erased from existence, as Walsh said. But the contamination was contained. The rest of the timeline stabilized. The rest of history was preserved. So I made the right choice. "No," Sarah said. "In those 3 million erased people were your descendants. 3 generations of your family was erased by the paradox your destruction created. But your grandchildren exist in this timeline. They'll be born eventually. They'll have lives that wouldn't have existed otherwise. So you traded one set of lives for another. You can't say one choice was right because both choices had catastrophic consequences. All you can say is that you made a choice and you lived with it." Marcus looked at this woman, who might be his granddaughter from a future that might not exist. "Why did you come here to tell me this?" "Because I wanted to thank you," she said. "Because my life exists only because you destroyed that system. Because without your choice, I would never have been born, and I think that's worth knowing." She stood up to leave. "One more thing," Marcus said. "Did I make the right choice?" Sarah smiled sadly. "In every timeline, Mr. Chen, you asked yourself that question. In every timeline, you never got an answer. In every timeline, you had to make peace with not knowing. I think that's what being human means. Making impossible choices and then spending the rest of your life trying to decide if they were right." She left, she walked out of the facility, and Marcus never saw her again. On his 50th birthday, Marcus was in the facility garden, a carefully maintained approximation of nature, just like everything else in the facility, when alarms began to sound. The alarms meant something was wrong with the security perimeter. The alarms meant someone was trying to get in or out. Federal personnel ran past. Marcus didn't follow them. He sat on the bench and waited. After 2 hours, Deputy Director Walsh appeared. She was older now, not much older, but visibly aged by the weight of what she knew. The temporal observation system in Phoenix has become fully operational, she said, sitting down beside Marcus without being invited. We didn't know it was still there. We thought we destroyed all of them, but apparently we missed one. It's been running for 5 years, gathering data, creating its own cascade of paradoxes, and now it's beginning to interface with what remains of your system here. What does that mean? It means that the timelines are starting to collapse into each other. It means that in some futures you never destroyed the system. In some futures you've been running it the whole time. In some futures you're still in your house, still watching the vault. Those futures are beginning to leak into this one. What happens? I don't know, nobody knows. We're entering uncharted territory. We're watching the system we created eat itself. We're watching history consume itself. Deputy Director Walsh stood up to leave, then paused. I wanted to tell you, she said, that I've read the files from the other timelines. In some of them you found a different solution. In some of them you left the system in place and it destroyed everything. In some of them you were never born and someone else found the vault. The outcomes varied, but the suffering was constant. You made the choice that minimized the suffering. I think that counts for something. She left him in the garden. That night the facility began to flicker. Not the lights, reality itself. Marcus could see the edges of other timelines bleeding through. He could see versions of his house from other versions of his life. He could see himself at different ages, in different places, making different choices. He could see the cascading consequences of those choices, fanning out into infinity. He could see, briefly, the vault as it had been on October 3, 1962. He could see Dr. Morrison at his desk. He could see Morrison looking up, past time, looking at him across 6 decades. Morrison mouthed words again, "Thank you." Then the flickering stopped. Reality consolidated. The timelines separated again. And Marcus was alone in the garden of a facility that might or might not be real, having seen something that might or might not have happened, wondering if anything he'd ever done had mattered at all. But beneath suburban houses across the country, systems that had been shut down and reactivated countless times continued to run in the darkness. Beneath the earth, temporal observers continued their work, watching moments that had already passed, archiving futures that might never occur. And someday, in another house, in another timeline, another person would discover another vault, and they would have to make another choice, and they would wonder, as Marcus had wondered, if they'd made the right one. And the cycle would continue, because that's what cycles do. They continue across all possible timelines, all possible futures, all possible versions of a world that was simultaneously fixed and infinitely mutable. History kept watching,